The significance of naval power in an army is made abundantly clear by the fact that two countries that are geographically close to each other and share a border are currently engaged in hostilities against one another. In this respect, the naval power of the armies and the developments that take place at sea will be one of the most important factors that will determine the outcome of the war between Russia. Before the conflict in Ukraine, it was believed that the Russian army was both very large and very powerful. However, the events that transpired during the conflict demonstrated that these assumptions were incorrect. Where do we stand with the Russian Navy? The events that took place at sea were brought back onto the agenda on February 24, 2023, the anniversary of the war, when the Ukrainian parliament adopted a new resolution and brought it to a. Let's break down this decision and everything else that's happened at sea during the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. On February 24th, the Ukrainian parliament voted to scrap all of the Sea of Oof agreements that had been made with Russia. The termination of the agreement on cooperation in the use of the Sea of Azov and the Kerch Strait was approved by 303 members of the House of Deputies. Law of Zik, a member of parliament in Ukraine, made the following announcement regarding the decision on the issue of the Sea of Oof. The parliament has decided to sever all agreements with Russia. It is possible that there will be movement in the Kerch Strait and the Sea of Oof in the days immediately following the nullification of these agreements. During the second year of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the naval might of the armies appeared to be affected. The Russian Navy made the announcement during the first week of February that the Dmitry Denovsky, the world's largest nuclear submarine, had been taken out of active service. In addition, the USS George H.W. Bush, an aircraft carrier belonging to the United States Navy, made its way to the Cheyenne merger in the month of January 2023. In this regard, the recent decisions that were made by the Ukrainian parliament could serve as a precursor to the events that take place at sea. The first year of the conflict saw significant casualties for the Russian army across all fronts, including the air, land, and sea. The most significant of these losses took place in April when the Ukrainian army lost its supply of locally produced. The Moscow cruiser, the largest war in the Russian Navy's Black Sea Fleet, was destroyed by missiles after being targeted by an anti-ship weapon. Through the utilization of unmanned aerial vehicles within this operation, the Ukrainian army was able to successfully distract the air defense systems of the Moscow cruiser, and then using the Neptune anti-ship missiles it fired, it was able to successfully sink Moss. The loss of this cruiser was a significant blow to the Russian Navy's overall capabilities. Officials from Russia have asserted that the ship sank as a result of a fire on board in order to conceal the achievements of the Ukrainian army. Those who were on board, as well as officials from the Navy, were able to disprove the claims that were made by the Russian authorities because it could not be denied that the ship had been sunk as the result of an assault. As a direct consequence of this assault, it was estimated that the Russian Navy suffered the loss of anywhere between 50 and 600 sailors ship by ship. The Ukrainian army sank the Russian invaders' vessels as they came ashore of Real Markov. An admiral named Essen was buried alive in the depths of the Black Sea after another successful operation following the destruction of the cruiser Moss. This operation came after the cruiser Moscow had been destroyed. Explosives were loaded onto boats that were used by the Ukrainian military. During this operation, the boats that were controlled remotely were successful in sinking two of the most important vessels in the Russian army's fleet. The Oris landing ship, which was one of the most important ships in the Russian Navy, was destroyed by the missiles fired by the Ukrainian army and subsequently submerged in. On their social media account, the Ukrainian Navy shared images of the explosion as well as the burning of the Ork landing ship. The statements regarding the attack came from the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. As a result of this, according to the ministry statements, the Ork landing ship, which is part of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, was damaged when it was struck in the occupied port of B. The Ukrainian army was successful in retaking Snake Island, which had been held by the Russian army since March. This was one of the most significant victories for the Ukrainian military. The island, which was located in the northwest Black Sea not far from the coast of Odessa, played an important strategic role in regulating the flow of both air and water in that. In June, the Ukrainian military completely expelled the invaders from the island with the help of long-range missiles that were provided by Western and European countries as part of their military aid packages. The primary naval facility of the Black Sea Fleet was located in the port city of Sevastopol, which was another strategic point for the Russian army. Additionally, the Ukrainian army was able to carry out a mission against this base and achieve victory. The Russian Navy was seriously harmed as a result of the kamikaze drone attacks that were launched against this base in a separate operation. The Ukrainian missiles were responsible for the sinking of the Russian warship Ov, which belonged to the Black Sea Fleet. The Ukrainian army also damaged the Novotursky and the Caesar Kov, both of which belonged to. The Russian army is suffering losses in the air, on land, and at sea as a direct result of the successful attacks carried out by the Ukrainian army. The second year of the war appears to bring about no changes to this particular fact. The commander of the United States Office of Naval Intelligence, Rear Admiral Mike Studman, has been in the news recently for his comments regarding Russia's presence at Sea Soon. You've seen Russia's maritime influence decline. This is due to the fact that Ukrainian soldiers are becoming more skilled at aiming and using the weapons that we supply them. The Russians' ability to maneuver has been severely constrained as a result of the Ukrainians' efforts, which has allowed them to improve their own position. During the first year of the conflict, Russia suffered the loss of dozens of significant war. The Ukrainian army, which has been bolstered by the support of Western and European countries, has completely overpowered the Russian navy, both on the ground and in the air. Russia suffered a significant number of casualties. The number of Russian soldiers killed or captured came close to reaching 150,000. This situation demonstrates that Russia is running on empty as a responsible team at the daily. We continue to conduct daily analysis of all of the developments in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. You can show your support for us by clicking on the button that says Super Thanks, which will allow our reports to continue being compiled with the awareness that journalism should be accurate and impartial. During his invasion of Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin was confronted with events that were not anticipated. During the first month of Russia was hit with thousands of sanctions imposed by dozens of different countries. The number of sanctions imposed on Russia rose to the highest level of any country in the world. These sanctions had a significant and negative impact on the economy of Russia. The rate of inflation in Russia has gone up, and there are disruptions in the country's ability to supply. While Putin was trying to figure out what action to take in response to the sanctions imposed by the West and Europe, he was also dealing with a number of issues at home and in his army. In the first year of the conflict, the majority of the Russian population was opposed to President Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Those who had been in favor of the invasion had their minds changed as a result of the mountain casualties suffered by the Russian army and Putin's inept. As a direct result of the events that transpired over the course of a year, virtually the entire population of Russia eventually turned against the occupation. The number of demonstrations and protests taking place on the streets of Russia increased. People demanded that Vladimir Putin put an end to the occupation, but the Russian leader chose to ignore these requests in order to protect his political career and reput. He was responsible for the deaths of thousands of young men serving in the Russian army. One of the challenges that Putin needed to overcome was the situation that had arisen within the military. Soldiers from Russia were reluctant to engage in combat with Ukraine. During the first year of the conflict, the Ukrainian forces accepted the surrender of thousands of Russian soldiers. Putin declared mobilization after he was unable to find soldiers to fight in Ukraine. However, this did not solve the problem either. Putin has resorted to using Chechens and private military companies because he is unable to solve the problem of troop availability. But things are changing, and it now appears that he will also have a coup by that time. What are your thoughts on the Russian Navy specif? What are your thoughts on the attack that the Ukrainian army launched, which was aimed at the Russian Navy? The second year of the war saw an increase in the amount of activity that took place at sea. We are interested in hearing your point of view. Keep up with us here for further updates. The ATP Daily News channel on YouTube is home to each and every Right Studies video. App is where you can find our usernames across social media platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. There is no reliance at all on any other social media publications by News to Do. We take legal action against every website and channel that utilizes it without our authorization. You can help us out by becoming a survivor. This year is shaping up to be one of the bloodiest yet for those fighting in Ukraine as both sides prepare for what is expected to be a Mo or Russian offensive, and a flood of more sophisticated weapons made in the West to aid Ukrainian forces. In light of this, Jens Stoltenberg, the chief of NATO, issued a warning a few weeks ago stating that the conflict had entered a decisive. This new phase of the war has the potential to bring the conflict into an area that is essential to Russia's military capabilities in Ukraine and is highly valued by Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. The name Crimea refers to this area as is common knowledge. The Black Sea Peninsula, which was illegally annexed by Putin after it was occupied by Russian forces in 2014, was used as a launching pad for the invasion of Russia in February of this year, which ultimately paved the way for Russian forces to occupy a significant portion of southern Ukraine. Crimea continues to serve as a base. Attacks carried out by Russian aircraft and naval vessels against. In addition to this, Russia maintains control over the entirety of Crimea, as well as a sizable portion of southern Ukraine, including the cities of Dnipro and Mariupol. These cities serve as a land connection for Russia's supporters to reach the Crimean Peninsula. This region is very important to the Russian army as a supply route because it runs through here. A number of military bases, as well as Russia's Black Sea Fleet, are located on the P, which is approximately the same size as Massachusetts. The significance of the Crimean Peninsula, which is shared by both countries, is without a doubt quite high because of this. Crimea is going to play an important part in the conflict in Ukraine, and it is going to continue to be the site of violent struggles. It is common knowledge that when Ukraine opened fire on the Kerch Bridge in October 2020, Crimea became an important strategic region in the conflict. Following the occurrence of this event, the offensive operations that Ukraine was conducting against Crimea gained momentum on the Crimean railway line. The final of the offensive operations was carried out the previous day. An unknown member of Grupo Saboteur carried out a successful attack on the region that is located 12 kilometers away from SIOP station and is close to the village of Park Tower. There is a lack of information that is clear regarding the types of weapons that were used in the attack by partisans. However, due to the magnitude of the explosion, a significant portion of the railway was rendered inoperable in its. As a direct consequence of the explosion, both the rails and the transportation system were rendered inoperable. The branch caused the traffic to come to a halt. The Sosta-St. Petersburg train and 2 suburban electric trains both experienced significant delays as a result of damage that occurred while they were carrying 166 passengers. It is unknown whether military trains travel in this direction. However, given that sabotage groups operate in this area, the current situation is extremely precarious because it is possible that new attempts at terrorist attacks will be made. The damage to the railroad track has a very peculiar quality according to the experts, and they point this out in addition to the broken burst damage. The rail also has a cut that is relatively. This does not preclude the prospect of investigating the railway line for any evidence of guaranteed damage approaching the assailant who carried out the attacks on the Kremlin administration and on the Kiev administration remain silent and not issue any statements regarding the explosion. Both administrations were. In addition, trains have traditionally been the primary mode of transportation for the majority of the supplies utilized by the Russian armed forces. This helps to explain why the military does not have large truck units that are as robust as those used by, for instance, the U.S. Army. Assuming this to be true, an assault on the railway lines in this scenario has the potential to directly hinder the supply of the Russian. With 155mm howitzers, 120mm mortars, and high-motion artillery rocket systems, the Ukrainian troops have the ability to hit the railway line and stop a train that is moving on the line. As was mentioned at the very beginning of the video, Crimea is going to be an extremely important part of the conflict in. Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, does not discount the likelihood of this occurrence and is working feverishly to build. On the first anniversary of the war, Ukrainian military officials issued a warning that Russia is working quickly to straighten its defenses. On the Crimean Peninsula in Chaplinskaya, which is located in the Kherson region, Russian invaders imposed a curfew that lasts 24 hours a day. It's possible that this was caused by the transfer of military equipment from the territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea that was being occupied temporarily. Russia has announced that the Crimean Bridge will reopen, which will allow them to straighten out the defense line independently, a consequence of the explosion's damage. The announcement was made the night before the first anniversary of Russia's military operation in. Moscow placed blame on Kiev for the attack on the bridge that connects the Crimean Peninsula to the Russian mainland. But Kiev categorically denied any involvement in the incident. The press service was informed by the Deputy Prime Minister of Russia, Murat Kuno-Alin, that all lanes of the Crimean Bridge are now open to vehicle traffic 39 days ahead of the original schedule. Kuno-Alin also mentioned that there were approximately 500, despite the snow workers put in long hours to complete the repairs. And it was noted that maintenance work on the railway portion of the bridge, which is also referred to as the Kerch Bridge, is still ongoing when one considers the conflicts that have taken place over Crimea. The question of why Crimea is the decisive factor in the conflict in Ukraine arises. Let's look at this issue from a more global point of view and examine the significance of Crimea in a bit more detail. People often discuss the peninsulas and their ethnic ties to Russia, but less often do they discuss the strategic implications of this. What is the primary impetus behind the conflict in Ukraine is the real motivation behind this? Vladimir Putin's desire to ignore Ukraine's situ? Or is it more about the danger that the expansion of NATO poses to Russia? The dependence of Crimea on water resources from the Ukrainian mainland and the significance of the naval base in Sevastopol are both straightforward geographical facts that merit additional consideration when attempting to comprehend what Putin's goals were in starting this war. The city of Sevastopol, which has a natural, is one reason why the Crimean Peninsula is considered to be so strategically significant. The port of Novorossiysk is the only one on the Black Sea coast that has deep water, while the ports of Sochi and Novorossiysk only have shallow water and require ships to anchor out in the open without Sevastopol. Russia's Black Sea Fleet, which it used to project its power into the Mediterranean and start a war in Syria, would not have had a place to call. Crimea, on the other hand, is a dry peninsula that receives an inadequate amount of precipitation to satisfy the requirements of its current population of 2 million people, which Russia annexed. In 2014, the canal was dammed by Ukraine, approximately 16 kilometers north of the border with Crimea. Since that time, Crimea has been drawing water from the Echo, which has since dried up and become. The region has experienced less precipitation and higher temperatures as a result of fair climate change, which has led to an increase in the water deficit. Russia blew up the dam on March 2nd, just 2 days after it invaded Crimea on February 24th. This allowed the flow of water to resume into Crimea. To summarize, the status of Crimea is the most important factor to consider when attempting to comprehend Russia's aggression towards. But can Zelensky Crimea is reclaimed by military forces as the Ukrainian military continues to rack up victories on the battlefield. Attention is once more being focused on the conflict. In Crimea, the strategically significant Black Sea region was once the crown jewel of the Russian Empire. It has a long and eventful, including resistance to the Nazis during World War II and more recently annexation by Vladimir Putin in 2014, when Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky initially exercised caution when it came to publicly addressing the city. However, as the conflict continued and the Ukrainian forces won more and more victories on the battlefield, it became clear that Crimea is a part of Ukraine and that the Ukrainian armed forces will take it back. He expressed his ambitions for the coastal region. In the event that Zelensky is resolute in his position, his Western allies will back. As part of the overall effort for Ukraine to win, defeat the Russian forces and force them to leave Crimea's Western allies, it is only a matter of time before Crimea falls into the hands of Ukraine. This will happen as part of the overall effort for Ukraine to win. I promised Ukraine tanks. In addition to tanks, the Ukraine will require long-range precision attack weapons in order to successfully drive Russia out of Crimea. These weapons include longer-range atoms and missiles that can be fired from a truck-mounted HIMARS launcher. On the other hand, if Ukraine takes action to retake Crimea, it may reawaken fears that Putin may resort to the use of nuclear weapons. Since the beginning of the conflict, Vladimir Putin has issued a number of nuclear threats while simultaneously promising to protect Russia's territorial integrity. However, many of the most prominent military analysts have repeatedly voiced their skepticism regarding the veracity of Putin's claims that his nuclear threats are primarily intended to discourage further support from the West for Ukraine, and that he would actually employ such a weapon without receiving a nuclear retaliation. Ukraine has been successful in driving Russian forces out of regions such as Khan, which Putin now claims to be a part of Russia. Attacks have already been launched by the Ukrainian military against Russian assets located in Crimea, including air bases. In a nutshell, given the circumstances that currently exist, what are Russia's chances? There is little chance of a meeting or negotiation to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. The conflict in Ukraine will carry on with all of its bloodshed, and the intensity of the battles on the front lines will even raise the temperature of the discussion as we move into spring. Crimea will always be located at the opposite end of this line of fire. Remember to subscribe to our channel and activate the notifications on your device so you can be notified immediately whenever we upload new videos. We appreciate you keeping an eye. You can help us out by becoming a subscriber. 1 year has passed since the beginning of this brutal and seemingly never-ending war that Russia started against Ukraine. During these years, the conflict in Ukraine progressed through a number of stages. During the first few months of the conflict, Russia was able to achieve significant advancements along the front line, but have military units in Kiev almost cried out to Russia's gains for their tea. A sincere and heartfelt thank you is in order for the bravery displayed by the care troops who were fighting the Russian invaders on the front lines. As soon as this stage is over, Russia's gains become noticeably less noticeable. And as a result of the harsh conditions brought on by the winter season, Russia's gains remained in a handful of small breakthroughs. The achievements of Ukraine in its own country served to boost morale and provide motive into their care military units. Thereupon, the Ukrainian armed forces began cross-border operations that were important for Russia, particularly in Crimea, which is known as the Pearl of the Black Sea, and where the Ukrainian drone army frequently shuts down operations. In recent days, a new front has opened up in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. There is a possibility that the conflict will spread into Moldova and cross its border. Let's take a look at Russia from the perspective of Moldova-Ukraine triangle. At the time that Russia started the war in Ukraine, one of its undeclared goals was to strengthen Moldova's position in the separatist Transnistria region, as well as in Moldova as a whole. This was one of the 3 countries that make up the Ukraine triangle. Instead, the unrecognized republic has developed into one of the most precarious locations on the map that the Kremlin considers to represent the world of Russia. Now, not too long ago, Moscow faced the prospect of permanently abandoning its outpost on the Dniester River. The Kremlin was interested in maintaining a frozen conflict at all costs, and Transnistria fit the bill. Perfect. The principal city of the research region has had a government that has long been responsible for public debt. Transnistria is a part of Russia and will eventually have Russian official recognition after decades of unofficial status since Moldova became its capital many years ago. Russia's position in Transnistria has been strengthened by a military presence of approximately 1,500 Russian soldiers. This presence is largely symbolic in nature. Since then, Kasia has witnessed a back-and-forth battle for control of its government between pro-Russian and pro-European forces. Moscow had the fondest of dreams that one day it would be able to use Transnistria to subjugate all of Moldova and make it a part of its side. By maintaining a positive outlook regarding the eventual reunification of the two countries, Turkishness control was able to secure a unique position for itself within the host nation. Moscow believed that if they reincorporated the impoverished Russian region into Moldova, then the waters of Transnistria would tilt in their favor, and to make sure that there was always a weak Russian government in charge of the country so that it did not continue to drift toward. As a consequence, Moscow never acknowledged Transnistria's statehood as an independent nation. However, it appears that the possibility of Kishk returning to Russia has been eliminated as a result of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Prior to this, very few people could have imagined that in the spring, the Ukrainian armed forces would be able to halt the advance of Russian troops, let alone launch their own offensive. Start off with the red. After the defeat of Ukraine, it appeared that Transnistria and Moldova would be the next countries to fall. At the time, it seemed entirely possible for Russia to seize control of Ukraine all of a sudden and give it a corridor up to the borders of Moldova. This would have been a significant strategic victory for Russia. There is no longer any talk of Russian troops taking Odessa and reaching the border with Moldova after Russia's embarrassing withdrawal from the Hockey region. Instead, let's take a look at the bigger picture for Russia. It appears to be getting worse by the day. Even the most devoted supporters of the Russian state acknowledged the fact that their nation was victorious on neither front in the conflict with. Transnistria is becoming an attractive and relatively easy target for neighboring Ukraine as a result of Moscow's numerous diplomatic and military failures. And this trend is likely to continue the assertion that Kiev's armed forces can easily take control. The self-proclaimed republic is not just talk, and there is no possibility for Russia to do so. So it is not. An unexpected move is being made by the wealthy region of Ukraine that borders Moldova. A sizable Ukrainian military contingent has taken up position a few kilometers from the trans border in addition to the Ukrainian army. This region is home to several battalions of the armed forces of Ukraine, which consist of armored personnel carriers, infantry, fighting vehicles, tanks, and R. It is anticipated that members of the UF regiment, which is outlawed in Russia, will take part in the besieging of Transnistria, which is taking place against the backdrop of Moldova's announcement that it is prepared to stage major military exercises on the Transnistrian border, as well as the growing number of active demands coming from Kino that Russian peacekeepers be withdrawn from the self-proclaimed Tribe of Malian. This is a very significant step to take. According to some estimates, the primary reason for the concentration of Ukrainian troops on the border in the Odessa region may be the village of Kobana, which is home to a rather sizable ammunition depot in the area. Taking control of Transnistria would unquestionably be a win for Kiev to begin. He is able to add to his collection of weapons by purchasing them from Kaba. Additionally, this would be a significant victory over Russia. For Moscow, the possibility of losing its outpost on the Dniester River would be shocking and excruciating. In a nutshell, each and every possibility exists. However, the instability that was caused by Russia in Moldova will prompt Kiev and its allies to remove Russia's military presence from the self-proclaimed Republic of Trans. This will completely deprive Moscow of any and all means and influence in that region. As was mentioned at the beginning of the video, the cross-border operations that Ukraine has been conducting against Russia, even in the most recent days, have propelled the country to the forefront of international attention without interruption. A Russian Su-25 attack aircraft went down on the territory of the Waluki district of the Belgrade region early yesterday. As a result of the investigations, it was discovered that the attack plane had gone down in the area immediately surrounding the community of Oracover. According to the official data provided by the Ministry of Defense, the distance between the village of Oracover and the Ukrainian border is approximately 18 kilometers. This information is, according to the Russian Federation, a technical malfunction was the reason for the crash of the Su-25 attack aircraft. However, specifics regarding the technical error are not yet available for public consumption. The fact that Russia does not share specifics about the technical glitch raises a question mark in the mind of the reader. Would it have been possible for Ukrainian air defense systems to have shot down a Russian Su-25 attack air? We are unable to provide it. There is no clear response to this inquiry, but we cannot rule out the possibility that this is the case when the events that have taken place between the two countries are considered. There are three different ways that the war could progress a stalemate. Either Ukraine or Russia will emerge victor. At this point, a breakthrough by the Ukrainians in the southern part of the country could set off an escalation in the war. That is just as dramatic as there is no indication that the war will ever end. Neither party is willing to negotiate at this time. Both sides are getting ready to launch major assaults in the not-too-distant future. In the most recent months, neither side has made a significant breakthrough that would alter the path. The war will, and Russia's failure to win in a blitzkrieg has led to many people making predictions about the future of the conflict. The recent comments made by Ukraine about its imminent victory point to a standstill in the conflict. The Ukrainians are united in their desire for justice and vengeance, and having experienced victory on the battlefield, they are unable to accept a territorial compromise after the humiliation of the failed campaign in pursuit of his maximalists. Putin, who has brought the first reconciliation, does not have the option of peace. This is because Putin has brought first reconciliation. When this war first began, the Russian leader did not view it as an existential threat. However, they do now. Vladimir Putin has staked his entire presidency on the outcome of this election, so he absolutely must prevail. Putin is getting ready for a protracted. The subsequent stage of the conflict is likely to be extremely challenging for Ukraine when it comes to military operations. Defensive operations are inherently more difficult than defensive military operations. According to the assessments of military analysts, the Ukrainian armed forces will be responsible for leading their forces against a retreating and entrenched Russian. The Russian military has had time to recover from the losses it sustained in the summer of 2017, and to prepare for the widely anticipated offensive launched by the Ukrainians. Even if an offensive by the Ukrainians is successful, the war will not end despite these potential roadblocks, and they will suffer a loss as a result of this. There is a possibility that this will harm the Ukrainian. Any progress made in southern Ukraine could put Russia's hold on Crimea in jeopardy. The peninsula, which Russia unlawfully occupied and annexed in 2014, serves as a representation of Putin's most significant achievement with regard to geopolitics. In the past year, there has been a lot of conjecture and speculation about what might have happened to his death. Would not even be a viable option for him, let alone a bargaining chip to use when discussing the terms of the war's conclusion. But what exactly are Russia's red lines, and what kinds of actions on the part of Ukraine and the Western countries that support it might cross those lines? The thought of Moscow blowing up the Crimean Bridge and the incursions into Russia's territory have been accompanied by speculation about where the Russian red lines are and what could eventually trigger massive retaliation and even prompt ordering of a nuclear strike against Ukraine. This speculation has been accompanied by incursions into Russia's territory. Putin has taken the situation to a more dangerous. He issued orders for a partial mobilization and began a bombing campaign against Ukrainian cities and vital infrastructure in response to these orders. Nevertheless, because of Ukraine's toughness and inventiveness, the effects of this escalation have been less noticeable than feared, particularly after Russian officials resorted to nucleus-ward swings, even if the suspected red lines were crossed. The worst-case scenario, which was the threat of a nuclear attack, did not materialize. Claims resulted from this, but Russia does not have any clear boundaries. We are now 1 year further along in the conflict in Ukraine, which has been accompanied by threats from Putin, and claims that these threats are pointless. The conclusion of the war is not yet clear at this time. As the following procedures progress, we will be here to keep you updated on any relevant development. We appreciate you keeping an eye on us.